Good evening, good evening, good evening, and thank you for tuning in to another Dr. Myrna Minute as we continue to explore our theme of 2025, Destiny Focus and Destiny Unveiled. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, like, share, and subscribe. And yes, we remain in our series looking at connected destiny as we consider Destiny Focus and Destiny Unveiled. We are in the series of Connected Destiny. Remember to like, share, and subscribe and put your thoughts in the chat. In our previous lesson, we looked at the connection between John the Baptist and the Messiah. We also was able to see and examine the power and the intention of God, how God aligns us and our timing to line up at the right time for us to be able to walk into purpose. We were able to see the great impact of John the Baptist in Jesus. John the Baptist as a precursor who was the one sent to be able to prepare the hearts of the people for Jesus the Messiah. And Jesus the Messiah who laid down his life in order for us to enter into right relationship and right alignment with God, and so that we can receive salvation. And on this evening, we will explore briefly the story and the narrative of Ruth and Naomi, a story shaped by hardship, a story of love, a story of secure attachment, but also a story that's birthed out of a theological declaration of God's providence, of God's affirming love, and of God's redemption purpose. So, in the story, we're going to learn about how the pain and the suffering of these two women were able to align and to get them to a place of connected destiny. These two women that were connected, even though they were different, right? They were different in age, they had different cultures, and they had different socializations, right? But all of this came together when God was able to bring light out of the ashes of sorrow in their lives. How many of us know that God can use our pain to align us to purpose, revealing that God doesn't waste anything? So every experience that we've ever gone through, God can use it. So not just that God get the glory, but so that we can see the good and the value in our life. But most importantly, we can see the power and intentionality of the God we serve. And so we're able to see that nothing is wasted. We're able to see that God intrinsically weaves every experience and every moment together in order for it to benefit not just the person, but also to benefit others, guiding us towards fulfillment in the profound purpose that God created us to have and to walk in, which of course leads to great impact, right? And so the insight of theology and the insight of psychology will be drawn from this connected destiny story as we examine Ruth and Naomi's relationship. So within their story, we're going to look at it from a theological and a psychological perspective. But on tonight, we're really going to focus on some intricate key parts of their story that led them to purpose. And so, from the story or the lens of theology, we're going to look at and examine deconstruction and reconstruction or reauthoring of their story. We're going to examine the impact of identity and security and hope and a new beginning. And from the lens of psychology, we're going to explore grief and loss, secure attachment, and the power of reauthoring your story through resilience. So, put your thoughts in the chat. What do you know about Ruth and Naomi? And how has God used pain in your life to put you on a path towards purpose, to birth something great? Put your thoughts in the chat. Now let us come in and center ourselves so that we can hear from God. Let us go to the throne of grace. Gracious and almighty God, we just enter into your presence. We thank you for this day, God. We thank you for being able to avail yourselves to us so that we can hear you, God. We thank you for instruction and direction, God. We thank you that you can make beauty from our ashes, God. God, we thank you that you don't waste anything. We thank you that you are a God who can hear our pain and you are a God who responds. God, we thank you for the ability to lament, God. And we thank you for being our container, knowing that every tear we cry, every time we cry out to you, that you are there to hold us, that you are there to support us, and that you are there to carry us through. God, we thank you that you are our resource and our provider. We thank you that you are the God who makes provisions. And God, we thank you that you are the God that allows us to reauthor our story, that you are the God that allows us to walk in hope and allows us to experience you in new and transforming ways, even in the midst of grief. So, God, we thank you, oh God, that grieving and lamenting doesn't end our relationship and our connection to you, but it's just the beginning, oh God. We thank you that we have the ability to lament and to cry out and you respond, God. We thank you that you make space for us to put our cares and cast them onto you, oh God. We thank you that you continue to hear, you continue to hold, and you continue to support us. So, God, we thank you for your mercy and your grace that's new every day. We thank you for your arms that hold us. We thank you for that whispering word that provides us a word of encouragement. But God, most of all, we thank you that you haven't left us, oh God, that your presence still remains with us, oh God. And we thank you that you continue to lead, continue to guide, and continue to direct our path. In your son, Jesus the Christ's name, we pray. We say amen and ashe, amen and ashe, amen and ashe. Connected destiny, right? And so we begin this evening reviewing part 3 of Connected Destiny as we look at the story of Naomi and Ruth. We want to read chapters 1 through 4 of the book of Ruth. But for this evening, because of time, I'm only going to read for your hearing Ruth chapter 1, verse 16. But Ruth said, and this is the daughter in law, but Ruth said, do not press me to leave you, to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. As we reflect on the narrative of the book of Ruth, there are many themes that we can consider as we uncover the connected destiny between Ruth and Naomi. We learn the effects of suffering. We learn the importance of mourning. And most importantly, we learn that God never leaves us, even if it appears that God is silent. The text illustrates how suffering can result in us making choices, right? How many of us know we can make good choices and we can make poor choices, right? But the text that we're going to be examining in chapters 1 through 4 through this series, as we look at connected destiny between Ruth and Naomi, will be able to see good choices. And I say good choices because in the end, we'll learn how they was listening to God. Naomi was listening to God, right? When she left where she was at to go back to Bethlehem. And so we learn the effects of suffering, right? And the value that mourning can have, because we need to lament. When we are hurting, God creates a space for us so that we can lament. Our lamenting and our emotions is not going to turn God off and not going to turn God away. Rather, it's going to demonstrate to us that we serve a God who has the capacity to hear and to hold everything that we need to share and express. Another thing that the text is going to reveal to us as we examine connected destiny of Ruth, looking at chapters 1 through chapters 4, is how secure attachments and relationships can be a source of hope and new beginnings, right? So today's lesson focuses on Naomi, the wife, right, who loses not just her son, but she loses both her sons and her husband, emphasizing the grief, the loss, and the weight, right? And so we also know that she had two daughter-in-laws. One was named Orpah and one was named Ruth, right? And so Naomi had requested that they leave and that they return to their kin, right? Even though Orpah cried, she eventually left. She heeded what Naomi asked and she left. However, Ruth didn't leave. Ruth clung to her mother-in-law, right? So now you're beginning to see the secure attachment that we're going to talk about later on in our next gathering. So both daughter-in-laws, Ruth and Orpah, both lost their husbands, right? So here we have this story. Naomi, who's the mother and the wife, she loses her husband and she loses her two sons. And then we have her daughter-in-laws who lose their husbands with no children, right? So neither Orpah nor Ruth had children by their husbands, right? So we have one daughter-in-law, Orpah, who chooses to leave and return to her family after weeping and crying because she didn't want to go, but eventually she left. And then we have Ruth, who chose to stay despite Naomi requesting that she leave, right? And so we can see within their storyline the impact of pain, the impact of grief, but we can begin to see a glimmer of hope and secure attachment and how relationships and how we form relationships have the power to allow us to experience hope, even in the midst of our grief, right? So we can see the suffering and the loss experienced by the mother, who was Naomi, but also by the two daughters, Ruth and Orpah, right? So we can see that Naomi suffered more than just losing her husband, right? So she suffered losing her husband and she suffered losing her two sons, but she also suffered the loss of her worth and her identity. Because during this time, women were identified by their husbands and by their male heirs, right? So they was identified, or they received their worth and their value when they gave birth to sons and when they marry, right? So here we have Naomi, who lost her husband and her two sons. So she lost her identity, her worth. She had no male heirs because neither one of her children were able to give her grandchildren, right? Especially grandsons. So she had no male heirs, no one to take care of her because she was elderly. She just could not go run out and get remarried and have other children, right? So that was out. Because of her culture, she would probably remain a widow, which meant that she had no security and that she was in a foreign land because she left her homeland in order to follow her husband because of famine, right? So culturally, the men were the ones who provided the value and the worth to a woman, right? Particularly her husband and her sons are what gave her worth, what gave her value, what gave her purpose, and what gave her identity. Naomi will be without security. She will be without a social standing. Remember, because her identity was attached to her husband and her sons, and so was her rights. So because she lost her husband, because she lost her two sons, she lost her standing, she lost her legal rights, she lost her identity, right? So she lost her purpose and her value. And so we can examine that when I want to encourage you to go back and read Ruth 1 and look at verses 3-5. Because when her husband Elimelech and her two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, died, she lost her family. She lost her blood kin, her immediate family, as well as her social and her economic standing, right? So I encourage you to go back and read that. And so as a result, she no longer had legal protection. She no longer had financial security, and she no longer had an identity. And we can apply this from her lament in Ruth chapter 1, looking at verse 20 and 21. This is Naomi speaking. She says, "Call me no longer Naomi. Call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. I went away full, but the Lord brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has dealt harshly with me and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" So we can hear her pain. We can imagine her pain through her words, her hurt, her burden, her grief, her lack of identity is clearly stated in the text, as well as her pain. In Hebrew, her name meant to be pleasant and to be sweet. But when she returns to Bethlehem after her husband and sons die, she tells the local ladies to call her Mara, right? But Mara means bitter in Hebrew. So she loses her identity, and we can see that, right? So previously, her identity, her name meant to be pleasant and to be sweet. But now Naomi is changing her name to bitter because she's saying, call me Mara. So she's saying that she is no longer Naomi, who was sweet, but now she is bitter to call her Mara. Why is this significant as we explore connected destiny or destiny in general? Because how many of us are blinded by our pain, right? How many of us are blinded by our grief or our suffering? How many of us are blinded by our experiences that it causes us or positions us not to see the hand of God or not to hear the voice of God? Or not to be able to see past our pain and our sorrow, because that is our sole focus, rather than looking to God and to ask God, what are you doing in this season? Right? Because it's okay for us to lament and to cry out, right? But the question is for us to meditate on what happens when we change our name. What happens when we change the identity that God has given to us? Because her name meant to be pleasant and to be sweet. But now Naomi is choosing to change her name to bitterness, meaning that her heart has grown bitter, right? Her heart has grown bitter. So her heart has switched from being pleasant and sweet, right, to becoming bitter. So take note of that as you go back and you study this chapter. How many of us are blinded by our pain, right? And it's not to negate our pain, because I know what it's like to grieve. I know what it's like for the pain and the weight and the heaviness of grief to be so heavy that it can literally knock you down, right? But what I'm challenging us to do is to examine, right, when we were in that season, or if we are currently in that season, and how is that impacting our life? It's significant to us because we need to recognize that even in our pain, that God has still promised us purpose, right? Even in our pain, even in our suffering, God still promises us purpose. So our pain or our story of hurt does not negate who God created us to be or become, right? It does not negate that. And it's important for us to get to a place where even as we lament, even as we cry out, even as we are suffering, even in our hurt, that we still know that God is present, even if we feel like God is not speaking, right? So by altering her name, Naomi is conveying her losses. She's conveying a deep grief. She's conveying her pain, right? So much so that she changed her identity. She changed her name, shifting her from full to empty, right? From pleasant to sweet, right? From being pleasant to sweet to being bitter, which can also cause a residue for her not to live into her purpose, but rather for her to live into her pain, right? And when we live into our pain and we neglect to see God and the power of God, it can take us or deter us from walking into our purpose. It also permits us not to see God's hand at work in our story. How many of us know that God's hand is still at work even when we're grieving, even when we're suffering? Right? No matter what emotions come up, no matter what we're thinking, no matter what we are experiencing, God is still present, even if we feel like God is not present. So put your thoughts in the chat. Where are you? How have you experienced God during times and seasons of lamenting and times of seasons of grief, right? Where are you? Have you ever experienced a pain or a grief that was so heavy that it blinded you and you couldn't see hope, or you couldn't experience or live in faith, or you couldn't see or experience the hand of God in your life because the pain was so blinding to you that you only saw the pain and you only wanted to live in the pain, right? Put your thoughts in the chat. I know I have, right? I can remember when I lost my brother. I could not even imagine a purpose. right? I couldn't even imagine moving on or moving forward. But it was through my lamenting and through my processing and being able to cry out to God that allowed me the space to grieve, but also allowed me to feel the presence of God, to know that I'm not alone and that God was with me in my lament, in my pain, in my suffering, and in my hurt. Right. So put your thoughts in the chat. Do you have an experience of pain or hurt and God was present with you? Or are you in experiencing pain or suffering right now and you feel like God is silent and not with you? Put your thoughts in the chat. So, what do you do when your pain is so great that you can't imagine destiny and that you can't imagine purpose and that you can't see past your hurt and your pain? Because I want to point out something that the lesson teaches us is that even though Naomi was lamenting, she was walking, right? Because the text tells us that she left to go back home, right? Means that she had to travel, that she had to move, that she wasn't stuck, right? That she wasn't stuck in that location. So she was willing to walk even in pain. I just wanted to highlight that. So the return to Naomi and Ruth to Bethlehem marks a turning point, signifying God's restoration after a period of hardship and loss. The story emphasizes how God uses even the most painful experiences to put us on the path or towards the journey of purpose, right? When we begin our lesson this evening, I noted the key verse in Ruth 1 and 16. Here is why. Ruth represents a symbol of hope and a new beginning, not just for Naomi, but for herself as well. But it also shows the intentionality of God and how God moves. Sometimes we can be in a situation and we can't imagine purpose, right? Or we can't imagine moving forward because we're looking at it through our lens and our perspective, right? And so our prayer should be, God, expand my mind. God, be present with me as I process this, as I go through this. God, never leave my side, right? Opposed to being in a position that causes us to be stuck, meaning we don't move, we don't walk, and we don't process, right? But one thing that we can see in the lesson is that Naomi and Ruth walked, right? Naomi may have cried out, she may have lamented in her walking, but she wasn't still. She was moving forward. So after their experience of great loss, because of her husband, because of her father-in-law, because of her brother-in-law, she was also, I'm talking about Ruth, was also without a male heir. And so the same thing that applied to Naomi applies to Ruth also. So she had no security, right? But she was walking, right? But I want to assert that she had security because she had to have a secure attachment to Naomi, right? So Ruth had a secure attachment to Naomi. And we know that because she didn't leave her, because she clung to her, right? And she begged her not to tell her to go again because she wanted to remain with her. That within itself tells us that she had a secure attachment, a bond, a connection with Naomi. Because Ruth was willing to choose Naomi, right? Ruth was willing to choose Naomi, and she was willing to choose Naomi's God. She was willing to leave behind her family, leave behind her pain, leave behind her past, and go to a new place she'd never been, in a strange land, right? How many of us are in a position where we're willing to leave some things that are familiar in order to go and get to what God has for us on the other side? Right. So Ruth chose to leave her homeland. She chose to leave her family, and she chose to follow Naomi to a strange place she had never been. Right. And so when she got there, she knew she would be an outsider because she was not from there. And also to think about what it means to walk. What it means to walk something out. Naomi and Ruth both walked, even though Naomi was lamenting in her walk, right? Ruth was silent. And I think that that also represents something. It can also be applied that Ruth's silence was necessary for Ruth to be able to process it. So I want to suggest that they were both processing, they were just processing differently. In our times of silence, know that we can still hear God, right? When we are walking and moving forward, even though we're not crying out and lamenting, God still hears our heart, right? So whether you choose to lament and to cry out, or whether you choose to be silent, God still hears you. So when we are silent, it's a time for us to have introspection and we can be reflective about our situation so that we can hear instructions from God on how to proceed. What is new for you as you consider that? What is new for you? What do you think about? Right? As you think about either lamenting or you think about your silence, right? As you move forward, how have you lamented moving forward? And how have you moved forward in silence? Put your thoughts in the chat. So when Naomi and Ruth arrived in Bethlehem, it was a new beginning, right? And so that was the beginning of their connected destiny, even though it was unbeknownst to them, right? So I encourage you to go back and read chapters 2 through 4, well, really 1 through 4, so that you can begin to see the unveiling of their destiny. Have you ever experienced a lament while walking? Have you ever been in a space where you were silent but still walking? Walking represents moving forward and not staying stagnant, right? Were you ever in a place and a time where you had the weight of these experiences that caused you to either cry out and move forward or caused you to move forward in silence? Meaning that you were in reflection, meaning that you cried and you pressed forward, meaning that you didn't give up because you were still moving, right? And then suddenly it was like your pain was met with a season of renewal and provision. That is what we're going to uncover when we come together again on May 16th, exploring what the barley harvest represented, being able to explore the relationship with Boaz and what that meant, being able to explore God's timing and how God always aligned us for our purpose and our destiny at the right time. Meaning that there's always a greater calling, always a greater purpose that God is trying to get us to, right? And there is a greater purpose and a greater calling for both Naomi and Ruth, right? Even though they were processing, even though Naomi was lamenting, even though Ruth was silent, they were still moving on. They were still willing to leave what was familiar, right? Naomi was returning back to her home, but Ruth was going somewhere that she never had been before. And not only was Naomi returning to her home, she had left. She had left, and now she's returning back to. So it's other implications in that as well. So, in closing, as we examine the beginning of the connected destiny story of Naomi and Ruth, I want you to share your thoughts. Put your thoughts in the chat about the season that you're in. Are you able to walk in the midst of the cry? Are you able to press forward in the midst of the cry in order to get to destiny, in order to get to purpose? Or are you able to walk and press in silence? Right? Because the walking can represent the pressing forward, the moving forward, because you haven't given up, because you're still moving. Put your thoughts in the chat. If you are facing pain, if you are in a season of lamenting, if you are in a season of grief, right? If you are in a season of you don't know what's next, right? I just want to give you a word of encouragement to know that God is still present, right? And not to lose hope, not to lose faith. But even in this season, whatever it may look like to you, right? It's okay for you to lament and to cry out. And it's okay for you also to be silent and just to sit, right, in your moments of silence. But don't allow that silence to cause you to be stagnant. Are you able to walk? Are you able to press? Are you able to move forward? Because I know sometimes as we walk and as we press forward, maybe sometimes we need to stop and reflect. But the key is don't stop completely, right? It's okay to pause and reflect, right? But then you keep moving forward. The same way that Naomi and Ruth did, they didn't give up, right? Because they left and returned. That meaning they made it to Bethlehem. They made it there. So they didn't give up, right? They didn't give up as they pressed through to get to something new. Know that it's okay for you to express your emotions to God. It's okay for you to lament, right? It's okay to share your feelings. It's okay to share your disappointments with God because God can handle whatever emotion that you have. God can handle and God can hold. It's okay to lament. It's okay to express yourself, right? But what we learn in the text, when you go back and read chapter 1, is don't allow the weight or the heaviness of the pain to cause you not to be able to move forward, right? Our text this evening is encouraging us, even in the midst of our pain, even in the midst of our disappointment, even in the midst of our grief or our suffering, to continue to move forward. Moving forward is the key. So we can learn from the story of Naomi and Ruth of the power that God is still present, right? God is present in our silence as we move forward, and God is present and can hear our lament when we move forward as well. So I just want to encourage you to keep moving forward. Don't allow your pain or your situation or your circumstances to keep you from destiny. Don't negate your destiny because our pain and the experience that we may encounter that cause us pain or that cause us to suffer doesn't negate our purpose. Because the word tells us that before we were formed in our mother's womb, God created us with intention, that we already had a plan and a purpose, right? So that tells us that no matter what we go through in life, those experiences don't eliminate or negate our purpose. So don't allow situations and circumstances to distract you and take you away from purpose. Rather, keep moving forward. And don't allow your heart to become bitter, right? Because how many of us know that it's our heart that is the dwelling place of God? And so we want to keep our hearts open, right? We want God to continue to remain in our heart. We want to also allow God to speak, right? So sometimes as we move forward, we need to be silent so that we can hear what God is saying, so that God can give us instructions. And so Ruth and Naomi's journey truly speak to their resilience, right? But not just their resilience, it also can lead us to applying that they had to have hope and they had to have a type of faith, even if it was the size of a mustard seed, because they moved forward. They could have laid down and died after their security left them, right? After their meaning and their purpose left them when the men died. But they didn't, right? They didn't. They kept moving. They moved forward to go back to Bethlehem. So in return, their story became one of restoration and legacy. And we'll be able to see that as we unpack the story of Ruth and Naomi, right? Looking at Ruth chapters 1 through 4. We are going to be able to see that how they became a part of the lineage of King David, right? And that is the lineage that Jesus came from. So we can begin to see the greater impact that God had for both Naomi and Ruth, right? So when God is leading us, right, as we go through our pain and our suffering, allow God to lead, even in your crying, even in your lamenting, and to know that God has the power to give us a story where we can reauthor our story. God has the power to allow us to reimagine. God has the power to allow us to have hope. God has the power to allow us to see God in our situation, even if it doesn't look like what we think it should look like, right? We have to make space to allow God to be God, and don't think that always things have to look how we think that they should look. And know that God has the power to give you hope, to have provision, and for you to be able to walk in purpose, even in the midst of suffering, even in the midst of loss. So, what's your destiny? Are you able to walk in the midst of obstacles? Are you able to press through? Are you able to cry out to God and trust God with your lament? Or are you able to trust God with your silence as you keep moving forward, right? And take time to be reflective so that God can hear the desires of your heart or whatever emotions or emoting you may be doing in your heart, right? Are you willing to express yourself by moving forward, past the pain, past the situation, so that you can get to the other side? And as always, I pray that something that I shared with you on this evening has been like a seed planted on good ground, and that you are intentional about watering the seed. And I look forward to seeing you for another Dr. Myrna Minute on May 16th at 8 p.m. as we continue to explore Destiny Focus, Destiny Unveiled, looking at the connected destiny between Naomi and Ruth. And if you have any questions or if you would like to know more information about any of the topics that I've explored, don't hesitate to reach out to me at transform at drmyrna.com. And I want to leave you with this as always. I pray that you surrender to God. I pray that you hear God's voice. And I pray that you embrace God's plan and purpose for your life, that you walk towards purpose and that you walk towards destiny. Enjoy your weekend and be blessed. Thanks for joining.